if in fact we were to redistribute all of the wealth that the 1%, the oligarchs and the billionaires throughout the world have, to people who have nothing. And I know it's going to be interesting to see that within 5 years, but that's long, the imbalance would be completely back again. And which is, yeah, and the rationale, the understanding behind that is, if we do not get past just actions, good actions, wonderful, compassionate, heartfelt projects and movements, and evolve the consciousness of humanity, or at least a certain percentage, a tipping point of humanity, to understand a deeper level of who we are, nothing will happen. Literally, we can pull out all of the stops, do everything we need to do to make things better, like it would seem reapportioning the money. But people who for millennia have been oppressed, have had no points of reference, literally in the pia matter, in the brain, in the intergenerational patterning of how you hold the space for I deserve money, I deserve wealth, I deserve a good life, I deserve quality, I deserve to not have to always be scrounging for food. If the I don't deserve, if I am not worthy, if I'm worthy isn't there in the consciousness of a people, that money will go right through like a sieve, because the brain, the way we think individually and then the collective unconscious of a people will not be able to receive and hold all of the reparations, all of the redistribution we want, or all of the wonderful projects. The projects are great, and if you know Joanna Macy, they're called holding actions. Basically, they're very important ways to alleviate suffering in the moment. A place to stay where you're not going to be run down, or the police won't be after you, or ICE won't get you. Those are imperative as holding actions. But in the 21st century, what we're up against, that's like putting your finger in a dike and the reservoir's about to overflow. It's like having a gaping wound in your side and putting a tiny little Band-Aid on it. Yes, there are a few people underneath where you put your finger in the dike that won't get wet. So the suffering is alleviated in that moment. And yes, putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound is better than putting nothing on a gaping wound. But we need something intensely more internally deepening, a shift of consciousness that is at the core of our very being as humanity, or it simply will not stick. The best movement, the most wonderful holding action, all the ways we alleviate suffering, they get squashed, they dissipate, they evaporate. Or I spent, along with probably a lot of people in this room, when I was working with the transition environmental movement, a long time putting together regulations and writing legislation and working on the Hill and doing the FCNL lobbying thing. And we do all of that. And with 3 strokes of a pen and executive orders, it's all down the tubes. Or the next sex scandal of your congressman who removes him, who you've been lobbying all of this time to do something, he's gone. It's literally, we need to get deeper than that at this point. And that's what I really do believe, friends, at least and some, like I said, some people really are not interested. Some people get it, but it takes too much energy to go that deep. But some people are needed right here and now to go that deep. Because we're not talking about a problem that you can assuage for a while. We're talking about the existence of our species. We need to go deeper. So I'm affirming what both of you are saying. These holding actions are extremely important, but without knowing who we are, and feeling worthy, getting rid of the self-loathing, get rid of that Western society has bequeathed to us through all of these traditions we're in, without truly facing our fears and being courageous, it's not going to stick. We don't have the option of it not sticking this time. Yeah.
Really briefly, to me that's the whole point of hospitality. Hospitality is about a shift of consciousness. It's about being in real community with real people who get it about the planet much better than we do. It's not just about being a Band-Aid or helping those specific people. It helps all of us. And I think it's extremely powerful and extremely important. And we're going to have to make room on this planet for people, or we're going to start shooting people at our borders.
I totally affirm what you're saying. Climate change hit the area that has been dear to me in the early 70s. The United States is just waking up to the fact that, yeah, there's big displacement of people. I mean, hundreds of millions of people all around the planet have been dealing with this long before it even grazed the horizon of the consciousness of the United States. I don't know if you, I work at the UN with East Africa and West Africa. I lived in West Africa for 5 years in Senegal. And my family is from the Caribbean, so I know that there are whole countries subsiding, sinking at this point. So the rest of the world got this a long time ago. There are massive camps. You know this from Nadine's work in the Nepali and Bhutanese refugee camps. There are camps of people that have been displaced for a long time, and they're swelling. And now the United States has finally gotten the memo. Yeah, it's going to be here too, and people are going to move en masse. And yes, being around indigenous people and opening ourselves to indigenous people that have not lost this is extremely important. So Jennifer, I'm totally affirming what you're saying. My thought is, though, that we're not going to be able to stop climate change. The numbers all say that already. What we can do is, the only way to swell the numbers of the remnant is to evolve as a collective, at least a certain part of this species evolving as a collective. And that means knowing who we are. We can be around people who have gotten it for eons, but that doesn't mean we've really looked inside and internally faced our own stuff and worked with our own minds and our own thoughts and the points of reference that our brains have. I'm asking folks to do this systematically, methodically, in a way that's not haphazard. Relationships are important, and we do get it there. I totally affirm that. But what I'm talking about here is intentionality and purposefully working with the pia matter that we have been endowed with to put it at the service of Quaker practice, in my case, Buddhist Quaker practice, contemplative practice, to make that shift, in addition to what you're doing, in addition to what you're saying. Yeah. Jim.
I'd like to have you talk a little bit about shadow. Partly because I agree with you that you don't get anywhere unless you're integrating shadow. It's not been my experience that Quakers are very good at that, or that our tradition does a particularly good job of bringing the shadow to the surface in a way that recognizes it as shadow and as our collective responsibility, and then does the integrating. We're frequently much too nice, me included. So could you speak to a little bit, just specifically how that connects, why you look, or whether you look at Quaker practice as a way of handling shadow?
Yeah, okay. I just want the shadow in front of us as I'm saying this. Come on, shadow, there you are.
I love the graphic, particularly the way.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a Tai Chi-esqueness to it, isn't there? Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. There are two streams of consciousness that I want to address on that issue. And go back to fox in your mind, or woman in your mind. When you open yourself to be a vessel for spirit, when you are connected for longer and longer periods of time, when you become the living embodiment of love, and a woman in particular, it just, oof. Anyway, the rest falls away. It atrophies, because just by being in the field, there's still a differentiation in that language. By just allowing yourself to acknowledge and experience the field, it atrophies. That's how avatars who live into it, and it could not just Fox. I mean, Mother Teresa, Gandhi, a lot of people did this. But we have Quaker examples. So they were just, and Fox actually was extremely disciplined from age 19 to actually take himself to those spaces. So it wasn't happened by osmosis for him either. But so there's those folks, but when you put yourself in that space, just constant, longer exposure to that vastness of yourself that is the field makes this atrophy, because you're shining light on something that isn't real anyway. Shadow is just distortion of light. It's the human brain's distorting light, and then collectively everybody doing it intentionally, focused on one thing, like one big of the isms, distorting that so that it appears like light, dark, good, evil, the polarities. But once light is let in to elucidate that, it will necessarily fall away. However, at another level, the way Western consciousness in particular functions as a function of, even if you're not aligned with Judeo-Christian tradition, in this country and in the West, it's the air that we breathe. You don't have to be reading the books or going to whatever, it's just there. That being said, what cuts us off most thoroughly from ongoing connection with the field, with universal intelligence, is not acknowledging that we are love, we are that light. So whenever you say, I don't like myself, I don't like what I did, or the self-loathing kicks in, automatically you're completely out of alignment with light, and you're building that shadow. So the work becomes for most, where we're starting with the community of practice, and we meet. We're doing individual one-on-ones, and then we're doing 5 or 6 friends working together in video conferences. Our starting point is self-compassion, loving ourselves, dropping that original sin stuff, dropping we're bad people stuff. So that is the first set of practices, that array of ingredients that we can use to work with these disowned parts of ourselves. A lot of our shadow is, my mom didn't like the fact that I had artistic tendencies, that I was a photographer. Do something concrete, be an accountant. So here is something that is beautiful about you, that this is your gift to the world. And here's someone who is your universe, your mom, your dad, saying, no, be an accountant. So this is something that is beautiful about yourself that's stuffed down into shadow. You've fragmented that part of yourself. Or it could be something all kinds of traumatic experiences. We have little ones and big ones, etc. And rather, so we can go around and function as normal human beings, we push that trauma down there too. So all of the trauma and all of the disowned parts of ourselves that are good stuff that our caregivers or people that we've been in contact with throughout the course of our life have pushed down there, it becomes a shadow only because we're going like this. We're not looking at it. Something is only shadow when we're keeping it in the darkness. It's another doorway into saying, when Fox stood in the light, the darkness fell away. But we can learn how to then access chunks of this shadow. And it's actually quite fun, especially doing it in small groups of friends. And shine a light on it so that it's no longer a big hairy, it's like Plato's cave, the big hairy monsters down there that are just shadows. You shine a light on it, and there's nothing really there. It's just energy that we never had to misqualify. It never had to be a big evil part of ourselves. It's just unacknowledged and pushed down so it becomes scary. So to answer your question, Quaker practice definitely goes there in the Fox-esque way, in the sense that if you learn to still discursive thought and really hone how we settle in on that bench, or settle it just as, the idea is not doing on first day, but doing it all the time. If hone how to still discursive thought so you can determine from moment to moment what you're thinking about that is of uplifting nature, of glorious nature. Is when we learn how to do that, then add to that what neuroscience tells us about the way the brain functions. So that other slide that talked about the little aperture that we see as opposed to this, we see more and more and more and more, which is what the abolitionists did. They were able to look at an aberrant situation in society and said, something's not right here. And they were only able to do that by being able to see more and more and more and more. That came from standing in that light. Because so many of us are no longer habituated to standing in the light and really doing deep contemplative practice of Quakers. That's why we're bringing in these other things to work with that shadow systematically.
Your speaking stimulates something in me, of course. But let me go back to Quaker. Let me take a different cut through it, which I hope is connected. Two pieces out of Quaker history. Woolman is, of course, one, who, in my interpretation, imagining my way into Woolman, you stand in the light and you realize, oh my God, I'm part of the problem. And so you change.
You just turn the corner and left me and it does. I'm part of the problem.
I'm wearing clothes that have been made with slave labor.
But you're also the light. That's the critical thing.
But the light, or Fox saying to Penn, wear the sword as long as you possibly can. And it's the point at which the light, living in the light, makes it impossible for you to wear that sword anymore.
I agree. And my point kind of goes with what has been said here earlier, that we need to get to a space where wearing these clothes that are made of oil, petroleum products, or driving something, or flying someplace, or what have you, is not because of this whole I am bad thing, which we inherited. You don't go down that vortex. That's why the storm exists simultaneously with the light above it. You touch the reality of something's not right here, but you stand in your truth of the vastness who you are, as opposed to letting, oh, I'm so guilty because I did all of this stuff and I'm doing all of this stuff. That's when we get pulled into, the more you focus on that, the more you're going to be paralyzed and keep buying shirts that are made of oil. You know, it's a question of balance, focused intentionality. The example I used because I was watching, sitting in front of me at the gathering were all the people in the Ministry on Racism, and I knew I was going to tick a lot of people off. But the example I used was that, yes, I happen to be African American. I have 4 children, adult children, 3 of which are sons, and all 3 of those men stand over 6 feet. They are imposing human beings, and it doesn't matter if they have JDs and postgraduate degrees. They can be shot in the street tomorrow. This is something that every African American mother lives with. It's the way this structurally is. So it's not a question of ignoring that. That is with me. That is in my energy. But if I let that become everything my social concern is focused on, and I go to quadzillion workshops on deconstructing this and deconstructing that, and all of the workshops that are great, but focus exclusively on being polite to each other so we don't insult each other. You know, it's a question, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying if we don't get beyond the fact that my gender and my race and my education and my socioeconomic status are nothing but a bunch of veneers that allow people to relate to me as a physical being, and think of the fact that molecularly we're all stardust, Jim. If that's where my attention goes, that's what I become. That's how avatars become avatars. If not, they're down the vortex of never-ending deconstruction of the same thing over and over again.
I don't think Woolman was engaged in never-ending deconstruction.
A friend of mine at Quaker Spring was talking, and I don't want to open this door, but he was talking about Woolman and Hicks, the Hicksites and he was saying, for me, the fact that I can tell that if he walked in the room, he loved me. The two men could say the same thing, but he knew, just because a woman was just love, that's what galvanized me. So we have to become that. We don't have to, but if we want to do something to actually shift something, we're going to shift something in the 21st century, we're going to have to go that deep. And like I'm saying, I know that this is really challenging for a lot of people. And some people may not be at a phase of their life where they want to go there, or it's just undoing, they think everything is going to come unraveled. But my premise is, once you get a taste of that kind of clarity, the euphoria, it's bliss state. So you'd be walking around and people are saying, "Why do you look so happy?" It's just like, because I'm channeling woman. Val.
I've had a small taste of some of what you're talking about, and I'll try to be brief. But for most of my adult life, my sense of what was essential to me made it very difficult to fit into a profession, a job, having a boss, and all of that. And because of the luck that I had, and because of the privilege that I had, and because I had education and the basics in life provided to me early enough that I didn't doubt I would have those things, I was able to let go of most of that to make my own job, to find a way to live at a very low income level and to do the work that fed me, despite the difficulties and the things I wished had been easier or better or stronger in myself and in my community. I can give a testimony that it is possible, even in U.S. culture or on the edge of U.S. culture, to do that. Which is not to say it's not hard, and it's not to say there's many, many obstacles, and it's not to say I do recognize that it is a position of privilege in that I had whatever tools or mental capacities I needed to get there. And I recognize that not everyone does.
Thank you. Two things come up for me when you say that. For me, choosing a monastic life was that. There are hundreds of thousands of young people who are permies, the permaculture folks, that live in earth ships, the houses that are built in the side of mountains and do their food forests, and they have intentional communities. There are a lot of young people who get it. There are more people than you think out there.
Thank God.
Yeah. Exactly. And I work with the Global South, and you'd think that education or privilege, that's to your second point, has something to do with it. What we're using lessons in outside of Mombasa, Kenya, Kilifi, Kenya, from Kazakhstan. And that is the fact that for millennia, peasants, small family farms, small farmers have fed themselves. We have become so specialized in food distribution systems and our food coming from thousands of miles. In the case of the people that I'm working with in East Africa, the monocropping, forced monocropping, or for export and disenfranchisement, dispossession of their land has created a whole other set of circumstances. Land was communally owned. And when the colonial system came in, what they had been doing for millennia, feeding themselves just fine. Markets were disrupted, people were moved off of land, and now what we're doing is inviting people, and there was made to think with chemical fertilizers and all the rest of it, the whole greening thing that we went through in this country, that this was the modern way of being. We are now working to bring people, recognizing that this is impoverished people, has toxified the soil. The toxicity is through the roof. The toxic runoff is through the roof. The soil is depleted with the modern colonial way of doing it. Go back and do it like you did it before. And even that is a shift in consciousness, because for 3 generations, they believed what the British and the French and the Portuguese and the Spanish said. So it's literally reshifting that. But it's interesting, in Kazakhstan, I have one of the women that I work with at Green Mountain College, who is a small farming person. That's her specialty. She was the one that made me aware of Kazakhstan, that is peasant farming, and there's a system where it's collectivized, but just like in the Caribbean, every household always has a little garden plot. So if it came down to some catastrophe, if there was some disruption in the grid or they couldn't get products, all families can feed themselves. And then they give a little bit to the market so that they can buy school stuff for their kids and that type of thing. So it's literally doing exactly what you're saying. We can, if we have the wherewithal and we shift those lenses, go back to living simply. Like I said, there's a whole generation of kids that actually, some of them are coming out of college, some don't, and know that there are no jobs. Some of them don't have college, but they know that those are the kids I'm working with in the Southeast that have what we call heirs property. African American farmers have been pushed off the land, and with land grabs, tax sales, all kinds of institutional land dispossession. And we're now working to see how communities of color can actually feed themselves as opposed to depend on anybody else. Because when the chips are down, everybody flees anyway, and you're stuck there. So we're doing that ahead of the time of the chips being down. Don't ask anybody for anything. Hang on to your grandparents' land that you got, the little bit that's left that we have. So that being said, these kids are now returning generation of farmers, but the Black Land Grant colleges are encouraging these kids to come back and live a power down, really low key, simple life, feed themselves, their families in little towns around where they are in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, the South, the Black Belt, which is from bottom of Delaware all the way to East Texas, actually, that whole swath of land. So in this country we're doing this, and this is through Quaker Earthcare Witness at the UN. We're working in this country, we're working for the whole African diaspora. So that's a whole other group of people who do not have privilege, who have been hoodwinked for a couple of generations, that are now going back to the indigenous ways they already knew. And Kazakhstan is between the two giants there. They're definitely not of African descent, but they're really poor people that don't have much education, but they're feeding themselves. And there's something so liberating. I completely concur with what you're saying, to not have to worry about carrying around stuff. Selling houses is a wonderful thing. Just liberation, So for me, like you made a conscious choice. For me, it was a choice of a monastic life. And that way you can give 100%. Nothing but service. That's it. No distractions, nothing. Just service. So what you're doing is an extreme version of complete commitment. And there's a recognition, well, if you decide to live on a minimal amount of funds, it is, and devote your life to the work that you love, that to me is extremely dedicated. And then on the other side of this, there's a whole spectrum to oblivious to anything going on. And in the middle, there are all kinds of gradations on what is possible. And it's all good. I'm just looking for the folks that really want to hunker down and get deeply into the practice. So I'm affirming every other way. It's just, I do think we're at a point in time where we need to build that fire. A little here and then there. Yes.
I just had a question, since I'm not coming from a Quaker community. Who was George Fox, and why is he? What is it about what he taught that you're wanting to go back to, or that you see as not being, continued?
He's the founder of Quakerism, and it's. I focus less on what he taught than what he was. What he communicated. If an avatar can communicate non-verbally, and that's why I keep bringing the point of Woolman. Yes, he stood on boxes and soapboxes in village plazas. He did all of that, and a lot of friends have said to me, if Fox walked into their meeting now, he'd probably be, who is that? This guy's nuts. What is it? Or people like Benjamin. Benjamin Lay. We were talking about this morning. People who, Benjamin Lay was someone who, during the time of abolition, he refused to wear any clothing that was made by slaves. He refused to live in any house that was, and everything was made by slaves. So he didn't live. He lived in a cave. So he made his own clothing, lived in a cave, grew his own food, and he traveled for meetings. His whole thing was a shock value thing. But he was one of these people who, he'd come into a room and he exuded it, and his life was it. So when I tune in on the energetic field of people, because that will speak so much more than what comes out of our mouth through the cerebral cortex, So, founder and energy. Yes.
I was curious, you've used the term Quaker Spring several times. I'm not familiar. I've heard it, but I'm not familiar with what it entails.
Sure. Quaker Spring is a convocation of friends. It's kind of like a reunion of friends that got together around a specific event a long time ago, and they decided to meet annually. It's conservative Quakers. And this past April, it was in Poughkeepsie. Their reunion was in Poughkeepsie, New York, which is very close to my meeting. So I attended, wanting to listen deeply to the way friends who thought very differently than the large convocation of unprogrammed progressive friends thought. And I was going to offer an interest group, and then after the first, and at Quaker Spring there is no agenda to their conference. Every single day they gather, and they sit, and they let the agenda for that particular day of Quaker Spring conference emerge from the leadings of friends in that convocation. So I had asked before coming in if I could do an interest group on Quaker Pathways Forward, and not knowing who these friends really were. And so by the first night, it was very bibliocentric, very Christocentric, a lot of Bible talk. So I just listened very deeply, took it all in. And next day, when they asked me, Pamela, do you want to actually, would you like your interest group to be part of today's agenda? I said, no, friends, I think I'm just going to listen. But there were, like in any group, there are always the people who are the flames, so they kind of egg me on. And so I did a luncheon discussion of the Quaker Pathways Forward among these conservative friends. And the challenge was, just before my luncheon discussion, they had a big session on good and evil. Mm. So, but it was interesting. What is beautiful about friends is that these folks were deeply ensconced in original sin in that whole thing. But Quakers are amazing in the sense that even coming from that meeting, I watched the light bulbs and the aha moments because it was literally a lack of exposure to any other way of seeing the shadow. So it may not have shifted anything majorly, but I knew after that luncheon conversation, and actually I got percentage-wise more what I call seeds of light people interested in doing this than I would in percentage-wise in another group of people, that it was something that they'd never been exposed to, that these are just disowned parts of yourself. They're not bad, evil, anything. And when collectively it all comes together, it becomes a big evil looking thing, but it's not evil in some serpentine, bring society down way. So that was my experience of Quaker Spring. I thought it was beautiful. It just, once again, renewed my faith in Friends. Because here these people came out of a discussion of evil, and light bulbs were just popping once they heard a different way of seeing it. So the openness of Friends is just mind-boggling sometimes. Terry.
Before I ask someone, just a quick clarification. When you use the word conservative, are you speaking of the conservative Friends tradition, such as Wilburite and conservative yearly meetings, or do you mean conservative in the sense of evangelical theology or something?
Not evangelical. These people came from a number of yearly meetings, which consider themselves conservative yearly meetings, whatever that is.
That's still evangelical?
No,
or-
silent.
No, it's not evangelical.
There's a more definite understanding of conservative.
They,
I really,
conservative as in
Terry, I suggest
North Carolina, Ohio, and
there you
Ohio.
go. Google Quaker Spring and you'll get exactly all the
Okay,
information.
good enough.
Yeah.
Okay, I've been trying to understand for a long time what the experience of early Friends is, and how it differs from what we experience. I think there's some strong differences, and one of the commonalities among, is Pennington and Fox and Margaret Fell in their writings. They were strongly the presence of the darkness was very strongly felt, and in many cases was thought to be the way to get through the light, the metaphor of coming through the darkness to the ocean of light. And the fact that the term convinced, was not what we understand it to be today. It meant more in the sense of convicted. That the process within a meeting for worship, was that the light exposed the darkness. The light yielded the shadows, and you must trust the light to burn that away, essentially. It was about salvation in a way. The thing that made it different from, I think, most religious experience of the day and today as well, is it was timeless. It was not about a judgment day in the future. It was not about a kingdom to come. It was about immediate experience that didn't really have a place in time. But the experience of seeing the darkness, the metaphors of struggle with the serpent were ubiquitous among the accounts of these early Friends. For me, I'm not sure if I completely understand what was going on, and I'm not sure that I have the same experience, but it seems to me that was a key part of what people like Fox were experiencing.
That's exactly what I was just describing.
Okay.
Recognizing that the task here is to work with the shadow. The shadow is, I'm using the term shadow as a synonym for what you're saying is darkness.
And they would have said sin.
Right. Which is why it's less what he said than what he did. And however, wrestling with that darkness or the shadow, I wouldn't use the term wrestling so much, because it actually, once we have the tools, it's pretty systematic and methodical and working through the shadow or darkness. And it's actually the process of self-discovery is, well, for some people, for me, it's my profession. So it's an amazing, wonderful, uplifting experience to reintegrate fragmented parts of self that are, when out there, darkness or shadow. You see where I'm going? So it is a joyous work, especially when you're doing it among friends who have this whole context, a deeper context of why we're doing that, to translate that into the upliftment of the planet, of Gaia and a species, of us as that. So what you have just described, in other words, is exactly what we're doing. We're just doing it methodically, systematically, with tools that quantum and neuroscience have given us to make it easier in the 21st century. Emily.
So what are your methods and what are your tools?
They come from cognitive restructuring practice, neuronal pathway work, from Quaker practice, from many contemplative traditions. Because as I mentioned, there are many ways. The idea is, and their practices are types of ways of tuning in through your activities, through your daily activities, and when you're sitting in meeting, to slow your thought. Realize you are not your thoughts. Descartes got it wrong. You are not your thoughts. You are in metacognitive position, observing your thoughts. When you slow it down enough, can see the thoughts arise, then you can see what thoughts serve you and what thoughts don't serve you. And you don't try to stuff or nuke the thoughts that don't serve you. You just thank them, thank that whole body of thinking for being good to you, because everything you think and everything you do, even though it can be completely misguided and off track and tunnel vision, your brain is thinking this is serving you. So you thank it for doing what it thinks it's doing for you. Set it aside gently, and then amplify the volume and the texture of the light in you, the beauty in you, the power in you, the vastness of yourself as field. And then that will, body of thought which is self-deprecating or doesn't serve you, will begin to atrophy. Now that's a visualization of the ticker tape of the thoughts, slowing it, sorting it, putting it over here. But what's actually happening is that in the pia matter in your brain, there are literally the synapses are fired over and over and over again that create your beliefs, your behavior patterns, what you think, how much or however little of the world you see. What you're doing there is looking into the structure of those neuronal pathways. And you're seeing through your external behavior what is happening, and you're literally inviting neural pathways that don't serve you to atrophy, or you're filling up. Like if they're grooves, you're literally filling up the grooves in the pia matter that don't serve you, and you're causing whole other neuronal pathways to grow that serve you. The brain is like silly putty. It is like clay. It's like Play-Doh. It doesn't, because there is no time and space, it's just a continuum. It doesn't know whether it happened in the past, whether it's the future, whether it's now. Your brain will obey you if you do this frequently, intensely, and clothe it with the limbic system's emotional content. The love of doing this, the love of the light, the love of the connection, the love of the non-duality. You clothe it with the limbic system's power in the heart, which is connected to the limbic system, the magnetic field there to amplify what serves you, and new pathways that are aligned with the frequency of light begin to develop, and that stuff over in the corner will, as of its own accord, rather than having to bash it or stuff it, it will just go away because it realizes it's no longer needed. You've got another way of being healthy. And it's through little things. We do things like eating meditation, or which is actually 3 pages of data because it's so intense in terms of really becoming one with that food on your plate. I spoke about this earlier or yesterday. So it's things that are very straightforward. The challenge is to get yourself habituated to doing it all of the time so that becomes the norm. In any given session, for example, I'll ask friends to associate into a time when they were at their absolute best, the top of their game, when they really felt spirit or light, whether it was professionally or personally, streaming through them. What did that feel like? And because your brain encodes information, you know, the old-timey carousels that for slide projectors where there were little slides and it went around. That's literally how your brain is encoding information. Each experience you've had, positive or negative, healthy or unhealthy, has a slide. What these practices that friends are doing at this point is we're taking a slide out that's a really, I'm in the light slide. Another slide that is, another powerful one is, when were you feeling unconditional acceptance and love from, it could even be from a pet, but someone who just, you are bathed in the light of their love. That's another slide. And then we take out the slides that don't serve us, and we, with all of these slides, it's called a closed, you kind of put them up there. We can actually rewire things, so what doesn't serve you, we take the volume out of that slide. We take the color out of that slide. We rework that slide so it's neutral. It's no longer impinging in your life experience. It's chilled out over there, like the thoughts in the corner. And then we'll connect the I am in the light slide to what is going, actions that are going to serve you in your community, in your life, in your family, and in your behavior. And connect that to I am in the spirit slide to build new pathways that constantly redirect you to spirit, to light, to joy, to love, which is basically redirecting you to yourself. Because basic goodness is who you are. Basic love is who you are. It's just Descartes and Newton made a detour, and we forgot that. And we think we're all this horrible stuff, and we're not. So it's a series of really small things we can do in the course of a day, going deeper and deeper and deeper, that we habituate ourselves to just being in the light. John, did you want to ask a question?
Oh,
Greg.
I was just wondering if you could define the field and how accessing the field influences this process, maybe?
We are the field. The field is us. Everything is the field.
Correct.
Your camera, your glasses, your pants, your body, the chair you're sitting on, it's all the field. There is Greg energy that is manifesting as Greg that I see. There's also chair energy, and you know that molecularly you're mostly space, but it's actually intelligent energy. It's not just void space. It's intelligent energy. It's kind of the glue that keeps you being Greg. Your molecular, your metabolic systems and your cognitive systems that are swirling around, creating the field that you are, is connected with Val because you're sitting so close to her. There's a complete meshing of it, which is why we feel kind of weird when you get too close to somebody, because these fields are actually meshing. You know, it's kind of like, ooh, your energy is impinging. You know, so the field, and so there's no differentiation between you, the chair, the camera, Val, me, the room, the meeting house, and do you remember the movie The Matrix? Did you see that? The streaming code? And there's a scene there, the woman in red, where it became really clear that the different beings of different forms, apparent forms of frequency and vibration emerge from the field, but it's all the field. That field is God. That's why indwelling light, that's where he was going. Indwelling light is, yeah, it pervades the morphogenic fields that is Greg and Val and the meeting house. It is all of this, the manifest universe is light, is God. And quantum science just calls it the field. Some woo people call it universal intelligence. So it depends on who's saying it, but it's all the same thing. And suffering happens when you experience yourself as separate from that field. And our society is now so separate, experiences apparent separation so deeply that that's what the great unlearning is about. Yes?
What I'm curious about is what does happen when other people are so positive, are so feel by the same feeling, but they're the opposite of. I mean, there are people who feel like that, who are just doing things that are not that good. I have met people who are convinced, completely convinced they have God with them, and they're all love. I mean, these are people who are amazing, but they just come from a completely different position about what might be good for all of us. I don't know. Maybe I'm confusing things, but I'm excited.
You formulated as a question.
It's just what to do. I mean, how to understand this, because it's like there are people who come from exactly that position of love. They believe they're full of love, but they're just doing things that are not too good. Some of the most violent people in Colombia are the people who are just full of that, and they're very convinced that they're doing love and good and everything. So I'm just curious about the energy part, about people who believe those things, and they just
they're seeing through the glass door. They are seeing their energy is pitched at a certain level, which is allowing them to see through a certain good intentioned, apparently, aperture. The mass, there's a critical mass. It's like little flames that become a bonfire, a conflagration. You will never be able to convince those people who think they're doing really good and are messing up the world that they're creating havoc. It's not, I don't feel it's my job to convince them. But what we can do is coalesce all these little flickering flames of people who are in alignment with the highest frequency as we can manage with the brains that we have, to be this big conflagration, just like the stuff that doesn't serve us over in the corner. Either they get on the bandwagon with the conflagration, or they atrophy, and given where the planet is, they don't get through the eye of the needle, and they perish. You see what I'm saying? We're at that point. We are literally at that point. It's either evolve or implode. And that's not the planet. That's us.